the next speaker is Professor Dr. Mike Eaton from the European technology platform Nanomedicine, talking on the delivery of nanomedicines to patients, a practical guide to translation.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Right, it's very good to be here, and I thank very much Biet for inviting me. Normally there's a clash on this particular date, and I either have to be fishing or here, and normally fishing wins out. So the other thing I'm talking about today really is a publication of mine, and I'll talk about the background behind it really, but also of interest to you will be the ETPN's Translational Advisory Board, and that's coming to help you, particularly academics and small SMEs. And you should watch the website and also the Twitter site of the ETPN to follow what's going on there. And I'm not really allowed to say much more about that at this particular point in time, I don't think. Those of you who want to leave after this slide, feel free to do so, but that is the link to the publication. I spent quite a lot of time on it. It's a distillation of my studies of the area over the last five or more years. The URL there is rather complicated, but if you go to, on the bottom line there, to the ETPM website and you search for Eaton, it'll take you straight there, so there's no need to write down the complicated URL. I would also like to thank Lou, who facilitated the free access to it, so there's no charge for accessing the information there. The point I'd like to make is that all research ideals aren't equal, and when it comes to translation, only a very small percentage of them are really useful. So on the left, you see really nano-basic research, and lots of different entities there. And on the right is essentially a product, a healthcare product. And one of the things the questions you have to ask yourself in getting from the left to the right, how you actually manage it. And one of the first things that becomes quite clear is the funders really are the key entity here, wherever they may be, because they should only fund healthcare projects that are capable or got a prospect of development. The other aspect of it is whether you manage earlier and whether the academics should involve themselves in this management process and selection process as well. And of course it's much easier to do it later, but I will strongly advocate that we actually try and do management earlier as well. So why are so many nanomedicine projects non-translatable? And I go to lots of meetings and I always say that 90% aren't translatable. And I think nanomedicine is essentially implies that it's medicine and not technology. And we have quite a lot of virtual nanomedicines, which is also around. So what do people say? Some people say, I'm doing what I want to do, and I don't really care about applications. That's fine. It's the academic freedom card, if I can call it that. And it's fine if it's not applied healthcare funding, I think. Because that's what is funded, and that's by far the biggest issue, and perhaps should be no surprise. And my point is, if funders don't actively manage for translation, they will get research. And I talk about the portfolios. I think they need breadth and also real innovation rather than derivative science. You don't put all your eggs in one basket, and I would canvass strongly for diversity and radical innovation rather than people doing lots of EPRs around a similar sort of molecule or whatever. And also strongly advocate in the paper, you can read a lot more about it. It's a very long paper. Patient focus rather than disease focus. So the object should be to take the technology, the nanotechnology, the nanomedicine, and use it for the patient group it's best suited for, rather than to orchestrate it so it fits into a particular healthcare call. Their argument is, no, it's untranslatable, but don't have the knowledge to change. And I used to sympathize with this very, very strongly, but now know that really change is possible with benefits for all shareholders or stakeholders, including the field. And this article, if you read it, helps, but it's not sufficient in itself. Getting to the clinic is what it's all about, and that's simply not true either. Certainly not true for patients, and the question is, then what? And we do need to ensure that the commercial boxes are ticked as well, And what the result is we see now is some expensive clinical successes don't actually make it. They make it through the clinic, but nobody's interested in them commercially. So that's also to be considered. What the paper basically does is to quantify the two metrics, which haven't been done before, really. Let me see. Oops, I've got it here. Is it working? Oh, yes, it is. Just about. The technology readiness levels, the TRLs, which have got lots of different definitions out there for different industries. And what I've done is to combine them with the pharmaceutical decision points, which industry tends to use. They're not so different, in fact, but to quantitate what you need at each stage in the process, going through 1 through to 9 here. And that hasn't really been done before. So lots of discussion about TRL4, TRL5, but what do you need to do for TRL1, 4, 5, etc., and so on. And for me, the most important thing is for here, right at the beginning, TRL1s, 2s, and 3s, rather than later on, because often by the time it gets to this late stage, it's very hard to do anything about it. But it's most important that you think about it at the point of research project inception, the point where you get a therapeutic product, and then most particularly as you go into the preclinical nanomedicine candidate stage. So this is essentially what the paper lists. The early decision points, I would also argue that there should be almost a DP note here, that the funders, strategy and panels for healthcare are really very, very important indeed. And choosing a viable approach. And this can be basic research, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do blue sky research if there's a way forward. And there are very many exciting options out there with very quick rewards. And so one sees, perhaps even at this meeting, there's some approaches were extraordinarily difficult, for example, but others which are largely neglected in Europe. Antibody drug conjugates, by and large, very little research out there, and yet it's a $10 billion market. So why are people taking on the really difficult challenges? Take the lower hanging fruit. Getting to DP2 is really a question of getting the right data. This is a point of no return, and really requires knowledge of the development sciences to go across that bridge. So once you enter into DP3, you're into a preclinical stage, and that's a major decision. And I would argue that funding should not bridge DP2 and DP3 without a thorough review, because you should come to the end of your research phase, get all your data together and say, is this good enough to go into development, into preclinical? And that, in fact, doesn't always happen, in my experience. Some of the issues which also help, nanomedicines must compete with other drug types. In the UK, nanomedicine isn't really funded. Doesn't officially exist. That said, there's lots of nanomedicine projects out there in the UK, and they're very successful on the whole. So you have to bear that in mind as well. Portfolio balance must be sought, and this must be really down to funders. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Risk must be acceptable and balanced really against impact. It doesn't mean low risk. It doesn't mean industry needs to do small incremental stuff. Quite the opposite. We need radical change. And it's important that development issues are really addressed, or you really stay in research on that boundary there. If you can't tick all the boxes to go, excuse me, to go into development, you should stay in research. Futurology, industry does this well, as it's quite critical, but funders on their own rarely get it right. They need advice. And once in development, there is no scope for change. And I've seen projects fail because of that. So, in research, if things don't work out, you change things. But once you're in a preclinical, that essentially you can't change. The toxicity changes, the resources change, and you run out of money. So once you're in this stage, it's important you have a gatekeeper. Some more suggestions to understand the whole supply chain, from research to development and to the marketed product, and to use the feedback from the product right the way back into research. The evaluation criteria should really include factors, whether the concept is capable of application. And I've seen this being used in the UK in terms of Sorry. Oh, I get some water. Hang on. I'm saved. Good. Yeah. Yes, the question of training, really. But I think once people are used to a format where it required to list the development criteria, each time they submit subsequently, it gets better and better. Evaluators must have... Oh, gosh. Thank you. I've got a hay fever as well, which doesn't help. Evaluators must have experience of industrial portfolio management and commercialization and research. Europe does not do development. Europe needs to include in university training courses elements of development, show the societal benefits of these. And I think in this case, the university technology offices could help. And the educational process could even be started earlier in schools, I think, as well. Graduate training modules should include team working. And this is, I think, really important. Academics do it quite well, but I'm not convinced that many pharmaceutical groups and universities do it that well. The diversification of the portfolio. Projects should be evaluated the realistic chances to help patients rather than the specific disease target. And lastly, I leave you the decision point system, which you can see the detailed requirements in the paper that can be used as a metric. And this can tell you where the project is, how fast it's moving, and ultimately it can be used for career appraisals as well, believe it or not. I've thought about it. So thank you there. My voice will recover, hopefully. And all the detail is essentially on the web, so you can find it all there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this stimulating talk. Do we have questions on the floor?
Just out of curiosity, how many academic institutions perhaps use this in their career appraisal processes so far? That might help, I think, a number of people. Are there any?
There are.
Yeah?
I can't tell you where they are.
More questions? Maybe I like to ask you a question. So what do you see as a good response to the stimulus to improve this review cycle? I mean, what people should act in what way to, let's say, give this a good direction and maybe an agreement?
Well, I think they read the paper is the first prerequisite. I think if we are also setting up, because of the gap, if you like, between, on one hand, the academics and the SMEs and the large pharma, it's been quite clear to me over the last, say, 5-10 years, there needs something in the middle. So we're putting in place a translation advisory board, but I think a lot of it can be done themselves. My experience in the UK, where we have a system which requires people, when they apply for apply grants, they have to list all the industrial sort of criteria. And the first time they all say, oh, I can't do this, it's impossible. But the second time they get better at it, and by the third time they're doing it, they're actually at industry standard. So they absolutely can do it if required. They will actually do it and learn from it. So, and it's benefit for everyone, really. The academics benefit, the patients benefit, industry benefits, and the field is benefits. And also, it enables you to pull in a lot more money too, because things are more relevant, essentially. So that's my thoughts, really.
Very good. So maybe we get later statements from Europe or the US to how to respond to this.
Yes, they say there will be something on the website, I believe, next week, which you can look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.